The lime green mountain bicycle remained in the drainage dish off Route AA near Richwoods, Missouri for 48 hours before the first search team passed it. The front wheel was buckled inward, the steel spokes sheared at the hub. The impact marks matched the bumper height of a mid-sized commercial utility vehicle. On October 6, 2002, 11-year-old Shawn Hornbeck departed his residence on that bicycle, traveling to a friend's home along a rural asphalt road. He did not arrive. A white Nissan pickup truck, operated by 37-year-old Michael John Devlin, had crossed the center line, struck the bicycle, and neutralized the boy's mobility. Devlin, a manager at a regional pizza parlor who filled overnight shifts at a local funeral home, stepped out of the cabin, produced a small-caliber handgun, and ordered the boy into the passenger side. Devlin had no prior criminal record, no documented history of violence, and no connection to the Hornbeck family. The captive was taken to a low-density apartment complex in Kirkwood, Missouri, a suburb 55 miles northeast of the snatch site. For the first 30 days, the physical parameters of the confinement were absolute. Shawn was secured to a low-profile futon mattress using high-tensile duct tape applied across his limbs and mouth. The apartment windows were sealed with heavy blackout plastic, preventing light transmission or internal visibility from the courtyard. During this initial window, Devlin transported the boy to an isolated logging trail in Washington County, where he applied manual pressure to Shawn's trachea until the child lost consciousness. Upon revival, Devlin stated that compliance would dictate survival. Over the subsequent 48 months, the operational control shifted from physical restraints to psychological conditioning. Devlin modified the parameters. He allowed Shawn to access the internet, provided a cellular telephone with a restricted minutes plan, and permitted him to navigate the apartment complex during daylight hours under the name Shawn Devlin. To neighbors, the boy was introduced as Devlin's son from a previous marriage. The psychological isolation was so profound that when Shawn encountered local law enforcement officers in the complex parking lot, he gave his false name and confirmed his residency with Devlin. In December 2005, an automated script on a missing persons forum dedicated to the search for Shawn Hornbeck recorded a user profile originating from an IP address in Kirkwood. The user posted a direct question: "How long do you plan to look for your son?" The message was signed Shawn Devlin. The digital trace stalled at a dynamic proxy server, preventing regional technicians from isolating the specific apartment unit. The file remained unchanged until January 8, 2007. 13-year-old Ben Ownby stepped off a school bus in Beaufort, Missouri, and was forced into a white Nissan pickup truck. A 15-year-old witness noted the truck's configuration, a missing tailgate, and a damaged rear quarter panel. 4 days later, on January 12th, 2 Kirkwood police officers entered the parking structure of Devlin's apartment building to execute an unrelated misdemeanor warrant. They noted the white Nissan with the missing tailgate. During the initial assessment by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Devlin remained stoic, providing detailed shift logs from the pizza parlor to establish an alibi for the timeline of the second abduction. An agent noticed a distinct autonomic response. Each time the name Shawn was introduced into the questioning, Devlin's carotid artery displayed a visible pulse spike, jumping from an estimated 70 beats per minute to over 110. The interviewer bluffed, stating that forensic tire impression specialists had already matched the Nissan's tread design to the mud patterns at the Beaufort bus stop. Devlin ceased his statement and provided the apartment keys. When the tactical unit breached the door, both boys were seated on the floor of the living room, operating a digital gaming console. The space was littered with commercial food wrappers and contained a single video camera mounted on a tripod in the master bedroom. The legal response was swift and calculated to permanently remove Devlin from the social matrix. Prosecutors assembled an 80-count state indictment spanning 4 distinct county jurisdictions, augmented by 6 federal counts detailing extreme child exploitation. Devlin's defense counsel reviewed the contents of the video cassettes seized from the tripod camera, tapes documenting prolonged physical abuse, and advised their client to bypass the trial phase. On October 8, 2007, Devlin entered a blind guilty plea to all state charges. The judicial response was structured to run consecutively, ensuring no future legislative shift could alter his confinement. The Franklin County Circuit Court issued a life term. The Washington County Court added 3 consecutive life sentences plus 60 years. The St. Louis County Court delivered 18 consecutive life terms. On December 21, 2007, the Federal District Court finalized the process, adding 170 years without the possibility of parole. The total aggregate sentence stood at 74 life terms plus 220 years. Shawn Hornbeck returned to his family in Richwoods at age 15. The cognitive transition required 3 years of intensive clinical intervention to address the trauma bond established during the 4-year confinement. The Shawn Hornbeck Foundation, established by his parents during his absence to distribute search materials to regional law enforcement, ceased operations in 2013 due to a depletion of public capital. Devlin remains in a maximum security tier at a Missouri State Penitentiary. In 2011, an inmate compromised his cell lock and inflicted multiple puncture wounds to Devlin's upper torso with a primitive steel shank, though he survived. He is currently 60 years of age and remains under 24-hour protective custody. Shawn Hornbeck resides privately within the St. Louis metropolitan area under an assumed name to maintain personal privacy. On August 23, 1971, a 21-month-old child named Melissa Highsmith was removed from an apartment in Fort Worth, Texas. The physical removal took less than 90 seconds. The architecture of the case, however, would require 51 years, 3 months, and 3 days to disassemble. The inception of the file began with a classified advertisement in the Fort Worth Star-Tribune. Alta Apentenko, a 22-year-old single mother working consecutive shifts as a waitress, required childcare. The response came via a public payphone. A woman identifying herself as Ruth Johnson stated she possessed a large enclosed yard and routinely cared for multiple children. She'd agreed to an in-person meeting at the restaurant where Apentenko worked. She did not arrive. Instead, a subsequent telephone call finalized an agreement without visual verification. At approximately 7:30 in the morning on August 23rd, an unidentified woman arrived at the apartment. Apentenko was already at her employment. The roommate opened the door. Police logs later recorded the roommate's description of the visitor: a heavy-set individual wearing distinct white cotton gloves, a headscarf, and a crisp all-white uniform mimicking medical attire. The roommate transferred the child, along with a small vinyl bag of clothing, to the woman. The door closed. The individual, the uniform, and the child vanished into the grid of Fort Worth. The initial investigation by local detectives and federal agents stalled within 4 months. The physical evidence was non-existent. There were no fingerprints on the doorframe. The white cotton gloves had insulated the surface from grease and friction. The classified ad had been paid for in cash at a newsstand. The telephone numbers used to contact the mother originated from public booths with high ambient traffic, rendering trace efforts useless. In September 1971, Apentenko purchased a front-page notice in the local press directed to the abductor, offering a total waiver of prosecution in exchange for a telephone call. The line remained dead. For 34 years, the file sat in a steel cabinet in the Fort Worth Police Archives. In 2005, a cold case detective reopened the folder, cross-referencing regional birth certificates and death logs from 1971 onward, searching for any child registered without a social security number or matching Melissa's biological data. The search yielded no anomalies. Between 1971 and 2021, 4 separate women contacted law enforcement. each possessing physical characteristics matching the original age progression sketches released by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. In every instance, forensic blood draws and mitochondrial DNA sequencing returned a negative match. The breakthrough did not originate from a forensic laboratory or an investigative lead. It began with an anonymous tip routed to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in September 2022. The caller stated that a woman matching Melissa's description was residing in Charleston, South Carolina. Investigators dispatched to the location determined the individual's identity was legitimate and unrelated to the case. However, the localized media coverage surrounding the false lead caused Jeff Highsmith, the child's biological father, to upload his genetic profile to a commercial database, 23andMe, in November 2022. Within 21 days, the database algorithm flagged a critical anomaly. The father's DNA shared an immediate high-density match with 3 separate profiles in the system. The profiles belonged to individuals residing within the exact same postal code in Fort Worth where the child had been taken 51 years prior. The system identified the individuals as grandchildren. Their mother was a 53-year-old woman registered under the name Melanie Brown. The family initiated contact via a digital messaging platform. The woman initially dismissed the inquiry as an automated financial scam. Her life had been defined by a specific narrative. She had been told she was born at home in a rural district, that she suffered from minor brain damage that restricted her cognitive development, and she was strictly forbidden from participating in outdoor activities or peer groups during her youth. The isolation had been absolute. She had fled the household at age 15, surviving on the streets of Fort Worth before securing employment and raising 3 children under an assumed identity. When the woman confronted the individual who had raised her, the narrative dissolved. The older woman admitted that the birth certificate was a fabrication. She claimed she had purchased the toddler for $500 from an unknown street vendor in 1972. Melissa, however, noted that the woman's physical dimensions and old photographs from the early 1970s matched the heavy-set description of the individual in the nurse's uniform provided by the roommate in 1971. A structural physical marking, a distinct birthmark located on her upper thoracic spine, provided immediate visual confirmation prior to the formal laboratory testing. On November 26, 2022, the biological family met at a secure location in Fort Worth. In May 2023, the Fort Worth Police Department Forensic Science Unit completed a formal STR analysis, confirming the biological relationship to a statistical certainty of 99.99%. Melissa Highsmith walked into the Tarrant County Courthouse and executed a legal name restoration. The criminal file, however, cannot proceed. Under the Texas Penal Code in effect during the era of the abduction, the statute of limitations for kidnapping was restricted to a specific window. Even with modern expansions for offenses involving minors, the state's window to file criminal charges expired approximately 20 years after Melissa's 18th birthday, concluding definitively in 2007. The individual who wore the white gloves and the nurse's uniform lives less than 20 minutes away from the family she fractured. She has retained legal counsel, terminated all communication, and remains unchargeable under the law. The police file is marked closed for prosecution, remaining open only as an information-only record.